Chapter 6 of Mental Fascination. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kay Hand. Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 6. Impressionability. In the last chapter I laid before you an exposition of the principles of the operation of mental fascination, particularly in its phases of mesmerism. The student who has followed what I have said therein has seen that there must of necessity be a marked difference in the degree of impressionability or receptivity to mental induction, manifested by the operator and subject respectively in order that the pronounced phenomena may be manifested. But this difference of degree of impressionability is manifested by all men and women. Between the one extreme point in the scale of impressionability to the other extreme there are many degrees, and each person has his or her own degree, subject, of course, to change by development. Magnetic Positivity. I would like to quote from my work on Mental Magic, illustrating this last mentioned point. I have said therein, I do not mean that the degree of magnetic positivity is fixed permanently in either person, for the contrary is the case. One of the persons, who is really the stronger, usually, may be weaker at that particular moment, owing to his will being fatigued, or by reason of his having relaxed his will power, as often is the case. And in such case the defeated one may be the victor at the last encounter, or may even rally his energies a moment later, and thus turn the tables. One may have a strong will in moments of activity, and yet in moments of passivity he may relax it very much. And this is a still more important fact: one may so increase his will power that he will be able to completely dominate those who formerly overmastered and then overawed him. All of us know of instances of this kind in our own personal experience. The two extremes. At the extreme point of mental positivity are the wonderfully strong-willed men who are natural leaders and managers. At the extreme of negative mentative point are those people who are moved by every passing suggestion or mental current with which they may come in contact. Those impressionable people who seem to live in the emotional plane of their being, and who are always open to outside influences, and are like weathercocks moved by every passing breeze. These people are really the reflection of the thoughts, desires, and wills of others, the last person who catches their attention being the right one to follow. You all know the type, don't you? I do not mean by this that only persons naturally weak-willed may be mesmerized. But I do say that when strong-willed people allow themselves to be mesmerized, they must relax their wills and become passive or negative to the operator, else there will be no result gained. A strong-willed man may voluntarily relax and become negative in order to be mesmerized. I have seen this done in many cases, although I have always urged against it, for I consider it inadvisable for one to surrender his will in this way, even for the purpose of scientific investigation. I am sure that I would not do so myself, and therefore I cannot approve of the practice on the part of others. The artistic temperament. Then again, I have known people of a highly developed artistic temperament, such as actors, poets, artists, writers, and others who possessed strong wills, to allow themselves to become very impressionable by reason of their active imaginations. That is to say, they would allow themselves to be so carried away with the idea of being impressed, that they would throw themselves into the part of the mesmerized subject, and actually mesmerize themselves, although allowing the operator to take the credit. This last explanation will throw light on a phase of phenomena that apparently presents an exception to the rule, but which, when viewed in the light of the above explanation, may be seen to come strictly within the rule of positivity and negativity. A mesmerist's trick. Public performers of mesmerism, when they meet with an imaginative subject whose will is too strong to subdue, often begin to bend their efforts toward arousing the imagination of the person, and thus causing him to become passive and in a subjective condition of acting out the part suggested by the operator. In such cases there is no conflict of wills whatever, but on the contrary the subject wills to act out the part, and becomes the partner of the mesmerist instead of his opponent. The subject in such cases mesmerizes himself, and voluntarily allows himself to be led by the suggestions of the operator, so long as the suggestions are not contrary to the subject's own interests. This actor instinct is very strong in some people, and this self-mesmerism is far more common than people imagine. It is seen on the stage, and among speakers and writers. Mesmeric subjects. Even many of the best mesmeric subjects who travel around with the professional mesmerists are of this last mentioned class to a certain degree. They are able to throw themselves into the parts, and play them well, so long as they are not adversely affected thereby. They are far different beings from the weak-willed, flabby creatures that are so often seen following around after the professional mesmerists. The imaginative professional subject is alive to his own interests, And as a somewhat cynical friend of mine, who had made a close study of the subject, once said, even the most obedient subject of this class would utterly fail to act upon the suggestion of his powerful operator to effect that the subject consent to a reduction of his weekly wages paid by the operator, even though the deep stage of hypnotic sleep be produced. Don't surrender your will. But I consider that even this imaginative class of subjects are unwise in allowing themselves to be guided and governed by the suggestions and commands of any operator, for I believe that even such a habit is injurious to the will. The will is a precious thing and should not be prostituted in this way. I cannot urge this too strongly upon my students. I say to them, surrender your will into no one's keeping. Regard it as a woman should her virtue, and allow no one to take liberties with it. Who can exert fascination? The average person possessing self-confidence and force can and does exert mental fascination over others with whom he comes in contact, although it requires a developed will to become an expert in this line of mental work. Besides this, there is undoubtedly a certain knack and technique about the work, which is acquired by practice, although some seem to have it considerably developed naturally. There are geniuses in fascination as well as in art, and there are others who have acquired the mastery in both by careful practice and determination. The requisite for fascination. In considering the qualities that go to make up the person in whom mental fascination is likely to be strongly developed, I may mention the following. 1. Physical well-being. For there is a certain strength about a man or woman in strong, robust health that must be taken into consideration. It is true that some persons not physically well but unhealthy have exercised strong powers of fascination, but this was in spite of their lack of physical health and owing to a strong will which allowed them to master even this obstacle. But, all else being equal, there is a power about a strong, healthy, vigorous person that makes itself felt. 2. Belief in oneself, for without this no one manifests positivity. Believe in your own power and ability, and you impress others with the same belief. Confidence is contagious. Cultivate the I can and I will. 3. Poise. For the calm, well-poised, imperturbable man has an enormous advantage over one lacking these qualities. The man who meets any emergency without losing his head has something about him that makes him looked up to as a natural leader. He has one of the qualities of positivity. Cultivate the calm, masterful mood. 4. Fearlessness. For fear is the most negative emotion in the being of man. Fearlessness is a most positive quality, just as fear is the most negative. Cultivate the I do, I dare. 5. Concentration. For this one-pointedness focuses the willpower upon the object. Do one thing at a time, and do it with all the power there is in you. 6. Fixity of purpose. For you must learn to know what you want to do and then stick to it until it is done. Cultivate the bulldog quality. It is needed. To those who recognize the need of the above-mentioned qualities but who lack them, I would recommend the careful study and determined application of the principles of mental architecture, as stated in my 7th lesson in my work on Mental Magic, in which the matter is gone into detail with exercises, etc. Nonsense exposed. There has been much nonsense written about who make good subjects, etc., in works upon mesmerism, hypnotism, etc., and many amusing rules for the determination of the degree of impressionability have been given by many writers. Some say that brunettes are the most impressionable, while others assert that blondes yield more readily, etc., etc., but the experienced investigator laughs at such distinctions. Some consider that women make the best subjects, while others assert that men really are more readily influenced. My own opinion is that the percentage is about the same in both sexes. Then again, one must remember that the degrees of impressionability are relative. For instance, A may be positive to B, while B may be positive to C, and so on to the end of the alphabet. And using the same illustration, M is negative to L, though positive to N. Do you see this? A lie nailed. Some writers have tried to make people believe that only strong-minded people may be mesmerized, and give as proof thereof the fact that idiots and insane people are almost immune from hypnotic and mesmeric influence. This is a favorite argument of the professional hypnotists, who use it in order to put at ease their subjects, or possible subjects, who might not wish to appear as weak-minded people. The truth is that the reason that the above classes are exempt is because 1. The idiots have little or no power of attention, and are like mere machines, and consequently cannot be induced to pay attention long enough to be mesmerized. But all advanced students of mental influence know that idiots, as well as animals, may be influenced by mental vibrations, or mental waves, etc., by treatments. 2. Insane people are usually carried away with a fixed idea or delusion, and are, in fact, practically in a state akin to that produced by hypnotic or mesmeric process to a marked degree. Their minds are centered on the delusion and cannot be taken off of it. If the attraction could be removed, the patient would no longer be insane, and although the sleep condition cannot well be induced in insane patients, still the best authorities know that such people often yield to strong suggestions and mental treatments to a certain degree, so that the rule does not always hold. Impressionable people. The class of people who yield most readily to the mesmeric influence, outside of the subclass of imaginative people mentioned a few pages further back, are those who have not manifested their will, determination, and self-reliance very much. People who have led a life in which implicit obedience or reliance upon others have been cultivated, these are the people who are the most impressionable. They have not used their wills, and are more readily ruled by the wills of others, or through their emotions. As I have said in my larger work, the degree of response to suggestion by command is to be observed in the highest degree among those who have always depended upon others for orders, or instruction, and have not had to use their own wits and resources in life. Unskilled laborers and the sons of rich men who have had someone to think for them often belong to this class. These people seem to want someone else to do their thinking for them, even in the smallest event of their lives, and are most impressionable along the proper lines. Then the degree of positivity rises as we consider the people who have had to do things for themselves, and who have not depended so much upon others. Positivity is the greatest among people who have had the ordering of others to do, or who have had to depend upon their own resources and their own wits in getting through life. The men of marked initiative have scarcely a trace of this form of suggestibility. Initiative, you know, is a term for doing things without being told, using one's own wits and resources and will. The above applies equally to the subject of impressionability, to mesmeric influence. And what does it all mean when it is boiled down? Just this, that the degree of impressionability depends upon the degree of the lack of will development. The word will is the keynote. And this in spite of all the talk, twaddle, and nonsense written and spoken by those who are interested in having the people appreciate the wonderful virtue of hypnotism. The mob spirit. The reason that mobs allow themselves to be influenced is because they surrender their individuality and individual will, and allow it to become merged with the wills of others until a mob will is created, which represents the average of the crowd, the weaker wills diluting the strength of the whole. When this mess of mingled and weakened will is properly mixed, it remains in a dazed and excited condition until some individual springs to the front, some leader of men who has held on to his individual will and impresses his will upon the more negative will of the crowd, and the mob accepts his suggestions and follows like sheep or mesmerized subjects, and does his bidding until some other leader catches its attention and interest. Emotionability. There is another phase of mentality that has its bearing upon the degree of impressionability. I refer to the quality known as emotionability. An emotional person is one who more readily throws off the influence of his own will and reason, and gives himself up to the play of the emotional side of his nature. Such a person is more impressionable than one who is not so emotional, but whose will is really no stronger. The reason is, that by his mental habits he has accustomed himself to open up his emotive pole of mentality to outside influences, and allowing his motive pole to remain inactive. He allows his feelings to rule him instead of ruling his feelings. He allows his emotional nature to usurp the throne of his will, the latter being relegated to second place. And the consequence is that his emotive nature has become more open to unresisted outside influences and impressions, and responds more readily to the same. It has acquired the impressionable habit. Do you see? This last explanation will throw some light on the fact that certain races of people are far more impressionable than others. They are emotional, that's all. Who is an impressionable? In the following chapters I shall use the term impressionable as a noun, designating a person who is sufficiently impressionable to respond to the influence of a mesmerist or hypnotist to a greater or lesser degree. These impressionables are comparatively easily impressed by the mentative force and suggestions of the experimenter along these lines. Please remember the sense in which I shall use the term. Later on I shall use the term hyper-impressionable as a noun, indicating a person excessively or abnormally impressible by mesmeric influence. The latter class will be further described in the proper place in the book. Let me give you a fanciful illustration of the subject of impressionability. It will form the subject of our next chapter, which will be entitled The Fable of the Mentative Couple. It will explain not only the matter of response to the mesmeric influence, but will also throw light on the exercise of personal mental influence that is going on around us in everyday life, all the time, everywhere. You will have a much clearer idea of the matter after reading this fable, and you will also be much more on your guard because of the lesson taught therein. Do not fail to read it carefully, and seek for the secret contained within its lines. End of chapter 6.